They called him Master Pyronius in that odd yet traditional way Baldurians have of applying honorific titles to anyone vaguely competent at a trade and possessing of more tools than teeth. Pyronius was an artificer, of course, though Master was perhaps a touch generous. Competent, certainly. Diligent, unquestionably. Imaginative, less so. Pyronius's genius, if it could be called that, lay in his meticulous execution, not in grand conception. He could make a clock that would confound a devil, a spring that would never fail, or a tiny clockwork bird that sang with more precision than any feathered songbird ever could. What he could not do, along with summon dragons or conjure fireballs, was stray beyond the boundaries of his rigid, practical mind, where logic might give way to the surreal. Such fanciful, arcane things were for mages, dreamers, and the imprecise, and Pyronius was, at heart, a craftsman, a superior precision craftsman undeniably, but a craftsman nonetheless. Pyronius had called Baldur's Gate home for many decades, a sprawling port city that some would call a cesspool of corruption and commerce found on the Sword Coast, where the river Kianthar disgorged its filth into the waiting sea. Nonetheless, his grand workshop was a marvel of order amidst the urban chaos of his surroundings. Elaborate and exotic tools of every craft, each gleaming and sharpened to a razor's edge, hung in a calculated order upon racks of polished steel. Components, gears of every conceivable size and tooth count, springs wound tight as coiled vipers, wires thin as a spider's silk, and crystal vials of alchemical solutions across the color spectrum faintly glowed with an internal light, each sorted, labeled, and stored with a care that bordered on the obsessive. But dust, that insidious agent of decay, remained the mortal enemy of Pyronius. It crept in on the breeze of the Sea of Swords, a fine gray powder that infiltrated every joint, every crevice, every meticulously engineered space, always threatening the delicate mechanisms Pyronius so painstakingly assembled. He waged a constant yet losing war against it. He swept, he polished, he oiled, a futile struggle to be sure, but also one that defined him. And it would be this ceaseless battle against the disorder of something as insignificant as dust that first drew his thoughts to Mechanus, the outer plane of perfect order and unyielding law. Not a reflection of longing precisely. Pyronius didn't really long for anything, for that would be to give in to an emotion, a notion Pyronius bristled at. But still, the human artificer could not deny the diligent strictures and deliberate organization of Mechanus had always held an inescapable, clinical allure. He would often lament his admission that each night when he was no longer in methodical control of his own thoughts, that careless and abstract dreams would invade his sleep. There he would witness a million modrons marching to the beat of an unknowable yet undeniably precise cosmic clock. He would have visions of the plane's vast horizon of gears, all turning in absolute synchronicity, the mechanized hum of its unison filling his mind, as comforting as a child's lullaby. And each morning he would awake to the same thought. Mechanus was a place where dust would certainly be an impossibility. While he had never been to Mechanus, Pyronius was still no stranger to its nature, having read every page of every tome he could find on the ordered outer plane. Pyronius had even once observed a modron. Many years ago, a duodrone had found its way to Baldur's Gate, pausing at the door of his lower city workshop. Its gaze dissected, then assimilated the meticulous organization that Pyronius took so much pride in. It understood and appreciated his commitment to order. Or at least that's what Pyronius has chose to believe. The human artificer found himself fixated, held captive by the creature's lack of organic clutter. No breath fogging the air, no errant sweat beating on its metallic hide, no indecision in its perfectly ordered thought, or tremor in its precisely articulated limbs. Just function, pure, unadulterated function. Wouldn't that be great, Pyronius thought to himself. For many years, over 2 decades in fact, that experience never left Pyronius. Still, it was nothing more than a fleeting thought, that is, until recently, because time, that great corrosive element, was now taking its toll. Decades of meticulous work had etched themselves onto Pyronius's hands, manifesting as a subtle, persistent tremor that had begun to plague him. It was barely noticeable at first, a fleeting quiver after hours of intense focus, easily dismissed as fatigue. But it had grown, insidious as the dust he fought, into a constant and unwelcome companion. His most recent project, a magnificent astronomical clock commissioned by a wealthy merchant prince eager to display in his observatory, had tormented the aging artificer. It was precisely the kind of intricate, demanding project that had once been a showcase for the mastery of Pyronius. Now it was a daily reminder of his encroaching obsolescence. He'd envisioned the grand mechanical clockwork device as a symphony of gears rendered in silver, brass, and crystal. Planetary orbs of the cosmos would revolve with breathtaking accuracy, tiny mechanical constellations would shimmer with internal light, and a miniature chiming mechanism would mark the hours with melodies of crystalline precision. In his mind, it was already complete, and it was a masterpiece. But his hands refused to cooperate, constantly at odds with his vision. As he attempted to set the delicate escapement, his fingers, once instruments of unerring steadiness, betrayed him. The tremor only worsened under the magnifying lamp, making the tiny screws seem impossibly small, the delicate springs like gossamer threads. He fumbled, a slip of the wrist, and a minuscule, precisely calibrated balance wheel, a piece he had painstakingly crafted 5 long days, sprang from his grasp, vanishing into the void of his workbench. A guttural growl, more akin to that of a feral animal, escaped his lips. He slammed his tools down, the sharp clang echoing across the workshop, only creating more chaos and clutter. He knew with certainty that he wouldn't find that wheel. Not today, not ever. A microcosm of the larger decay he felt now consuming him. Pyronius rubbed his tired eyes, the harsh glare of the lamp exacerbating the blurriness that had become increasingly more common. He squinted at the blueprint laid out before him, the intricate lines swimming into an indistinguishable haze. He had to constantly readjust his spectacles, clean the lenses, strain to focus, yet clarity remained elusive. This was the same Pyronius who could once discern flaws invisible to lesser eyes, now struggling to see the most basic of lines and words that defined his craft. Days bled into weeks and then months, yet the astronomical clock remained stubbornly incomplete. Each setback, each fumbled component, each blurred line chipped away at his confidence. He found himself making errors he would have scoffed at in his younger years, misjudging measurements, forgetting formulas, losing his place in complex sequences of assembly. These were not just mistakes, they were betrayals by his own mind, by the very engine of logic he had always relied upon. For the first time in his life, Pyronius was forced to abandon a project and admit it was now beyond his capabilities. He sank onto his workbench stool, the weight of his years pressing down on him. He looked at his hands, these once steady, precise instruments, now trembling, clumsy, unreliable. These were no longer the tools of a master craftsman, but the decaying implements of an old man. His craft, his identity, his purpose, all were being eroded by the relentless march of time and the inherent flaws of his organic form. The dust, it seemed, was winning. And with that realization, a desperate thought began to form, a seed of an idea that would have been unthinkable just months ago. There had to be a way to escape this cursed eroding vessel, to preserve his knowledge and mastery, to reclaim the precision that was slipping through his aging fingers. It was in that bleak moment of failure that the first nascent thoughts of transcendence, of a different kind of existence, began to take root. Perhaps the answer lay in something beyond the organic form, something mechanical, something eternal. Lichdom. The workshop had taken on a new aroma, beyond that of the usual gear oils and metal filings. It was a faint, persistent scent of arcane residue and something vaguely burnt, like old parchment and bad incense. Pyronius, no longer fully dedicated to his actual work, for the first time in living memory had become a scholar of sorts, a student of the darkest knowledge. He'd immersed himself in the pages of blasphemous tomes and forbidden texts, filled with dark rituals that promised pathways to transcendence and immortality. Lichdom. The word itself tasted like ash in the mouth, but Pyronius, facing the decline of his own mechanisms of flesh and bone, was a man who understood, more than most, the brutal logic of necessity. It was during this period, surrounded by diagrams of teeth-grinding horrors and incantations in language that sounded suspiciously like gibberish, that the whispers began. They started subtly, not as voices at first, but as primal urges and wholly illogical impulses that Pyronius could not easily explain. A sudden, inexplicable desire to leave a tool unsharpened, or a blueprint drawing incomplete. The introduction of a deliberate flaw into a design, or a jarring note into a perfect symphony of gears. He resisted the anomalies. These were aberrations, glitches in his mental machinery, but they persisted, growing stronger, more insistent. Pyronius mused that perhaps these were the manifestations of his aging mind, now finally fragmenting. One day Pyronius found himself staring at a half-finished clockwork hummingbird, a marvel of miniaturization that had consumed months of diligent work and intricate crafting, when a new, alien urge seized upon him. To make it beautiful. Not efficient, not functional, but aesthetically pleasing. To adorn it with useless filigree, to paint its wings with vibrant, impractical colors. These thoughts were anathema to and a violation of Pyronius's core principles, yet this overwhelming urge persisted. His research into lichdom, initially a purely intellectual exercise, quickly took on a feverish intensity. Long past the reading of tomes, he now consulted with dubious scholars and ultimately ventured into the infamous planter city of Sigil, the city of doors, seeking knowledge that was both taboo and dangerous. It was there he made contact with unseen figures that deal in the illicit black markets of the forbidden, and he would soon find something of significant interest, a vial filled with a viscous black ichor. This was the essence of a dead god, the underground dealer insisted, an ancient primordial entity of pure logic and order. Pyronius, normally skeptical of such outlandish claims, did feel a strange pull toward the vial. The fluid within pulsed with a faint iridescent glow, a siren song to his order-seeking mind. He purchased the ichor, its price being a sliver of his own unease as much as the small fortune in gold, returning to Baldur's Gate to uncover its secrets. Back in the familiar confines of his workshop, vial in hand, the whispers only intensified. They were clearer now, a chorus of sibilant voices that spoke of breaking the shackles of mortality, the limitations of the flesh, achieving his own lichdom. The finest of gears are still subject to wear and decay, the voices would reason. Even the most precise calculations cannot account for the inherent instability of matter. The whispers warned the artificer that flesh is a cage, a prison of decay, and any attempt to augment the organic are only destined to fail. Their voices now filled Pyronius with an insidious logic. True mastery, the voices would promise, lie beyond the limitations of the mortal form. But unknown to Pyronius, these whispers were lies and half-truths. The ichor was not the celestial remnants of a god of order, but a trace essence of that which lurks. Gonador, the Elder Eye, a primordial entity of chaos, evil, and war. But to Pyronius, caught between his fear of mortality and his own obsession with mechanistic perfection, these words were music to his ears, a chorus of reason and logic that he could not ignore. Driven by the corrupting voices of the Ancient One, Pyronius would uncover rumors of a lost, nameless ruin deep under the surface of Tyrell, and a driving impulse he could not shake assured him the answers he sought could be found there. He descended into the Underdark with some trepidation, but mostly a morbid curiosity. The air tasted of wet stone and something else, something stale, acrid, and faintly organic, like rotting leaves and burnt bone. Illogical sense, but then the Underdark was a most illogical place. Sunless, cavernous, riddled with things that should not be, at least according to the biased rules of the surface world. Pyronius sought these ruins of a forgotten, now nameless city, one swallowed by time centuries ago, a place consumed not by war or natural disaster, but by its own unraveling, a city that had bargained with chaos and lost. Its precise location was, most fittingly, imprecise. As Pyronius reached the lightless depths of the lower dark, some 10 miles below the surface, his knowledge of the Underdark was soon exhausted. Yet something, perhaps his own intuition, perhaps something more darkly divine, guided him another 3 days past an enormous body of water he would later learn was called the Giant's Chalice, the largest freshwater lake in all the lower dark. Underdark cartography being what it was, as much rumor and hearsay as reliable record, especially when it comes to the lower dark, Pyronius was fortunate to not have been captured by a clan of Duergar or have his brain eaten by mind flayers before finding his destination. But find it he did, or rather what remained of it. He might have missed it completely if not for a trail of foul-smelling, viscous black fluid that mirrored the contents of the vial he purchased in Sigil. This was the place, littered ruins of cyclopean blocks of stone and an unsettling heavy air of wrongness. There he would find, or was perhaps guided, to a secret chamber. Stepping inside, he gazed upon a large, shimmering pool of the same ichor, its surface reflecting the faint phosphorescent light of the Underdark with an oily, iridescent sheen. As he approached the pool, a disembodied voice spoke, or maybe it was all in his mind, Pyronius couldn't tell. The words were accompanied by a sensation of conveyed thoughts, of a precise, cold logic, of achieving a higher state of being.
True order is not stasis, but perfect adaptability to reshape oneself to any circumstance. I can unlock the secrets you seek. Through me, you will acquire far more than the preservation of the self.
The voice purred, its tone seductive, promising.
To resist change is to embrace death. Your fear is illogical.
The voice concluded, its tone almost mocking. Pyronius knew this was a negotiation, his opportunity to make a dark bargain. The price demanded was abstract. The sacrifice of predictability, the dark impression conveyed, embrace the illogical, incorporate chaos. He who had dedicated his life to predictable precision was now being asked to invite and welcome its antithesis in the form of chaos. Pyronius pushed these feelings aside, rationalizing it as a necessary step, perhaps a controlled experiment in chaos to achieve ultimate order. But a whisper of doubt lingered. Logic, he was beginning to suspect, held little sway here. Still, Pyronius accepted the terms. Of course he accepted. Logic, after all, dictated that any price was worth paying for the ultimate optimization of a failing device, even one it seemed as illogical as his own. Drawn by an irresistible urge, Pyronius reached out and touched the surface of the pool, the ichor clinging to his fingers like oil. In that instant, a jolt of energy surged through his body, and he felt a connection to something vast, something ancient and dark, something both terrifying and yet still exhilarating. The chamber fell silent, and the artificer's world went black. Pyronius would awake in his workshop with no recollection of how he returned to Baldur's Gate. However, his mind was now filled with the gift of dark knowledge that were the unlocked secrets of lichdom. He would also soon realize the duplicity at play, that he had made a pact, a gradual surrender to the whispers, to the lies, to the contamination of the Elder Eye. Yet, despite knowing that Ganondorr was now his dark benefactor, Pyronius knew with absolute certainty that he would follow these steps to immortality. He would embrace the path that lay before him, no matter how dark. For he was Pyronius, the master artificer, seeker of perfect order, and he would become the Clockwork Lich. With secrets revealed and rituals understood, it would be the acquisition of a final ingredient that would, predictably, prove to be problematic. The potion of transformation called for the tears of a Marut, a powerful and intelligent construct called an Inevitable from the plane of Mechanus. These implacable, lawful punishers were the embodiment of cosmic law, order made manifest in metallic and stone form. Maruts are charged with hunting down those who try to deny or cheat death through the most unnatural of methods, such as by lichdom, an irony not lost on Pyronius. The recipe was largely symbolic, not calling for actual tears, of course, as one would assume such constructs were incapable of actually crying, although acquiring even the symbolic, abstract representation of inherent flaw within perfect order was itself a paradox that might make finding a weeping Inevitable seem more plausible. Pyronius spent weeks studying the nature of Maruts, their core directives, their steadfast adherence to cosmic law, and then he found it. A potential conflict, a subtle contradiction between two fundamental laws they were programmed to uphold, to maintain cosmic order, and yet to preserve the integrity of Mechanus itself, even from internal logical failures. With this information, Pyronius began to construct his trap, a miniature, self-contained Mechanus in a microcosm, an artifact device designed to simulate a logical breakdown within the plane of Mechanus. It was a masterpiece of miniaturization, a synchronicity of gears and springs that hummed in unison with contained energy. Pyronius journeyed to Mechanus, the air growing thin and strangely resonant as he crossed the planar boundary. The landscape was a breathtaking, terrifying vista of interlocking gears and impossible architectures stretching to an infinite horizon, pure, unyielding order made manifest. There he located a Marut, designated Justiciar Unit 426, precisely where his divinations had indicated. It was a monolithic figure of brass, stone, and onyx, standing motionless amidst the plane's humming machinery. Pyronius nervously approached the imposing Marut. This was not just a construct or a machine, it was a direct embodiment of cosmic law and order, and one of the most powerful of its kind in all of Mechanus. He presented his miniature Mechanus in microcosm, the artifact device, humming with contained, simulated chaos. This, Pyronius stated, his voice echoing strangely in the ordered silence, represents a logical anomaly, a potential cascade failure within the structure of Mechanus itself, and must be analyzed. The Marut turned to face Pyronius, its optical sensors focusing on the device, its eternal mechanisms whirring with an arcane-like processing power. As the construct began its analysis of the intricate clockwork paradox, a visible tremor ran through its massive frame. Its limbs twitched, and a low grinding sound emanated from its joints, the sound of perfect order encountering irreconcilable contradiction. Then it happened. Not tears per se, but a liquid-like surge of raw planar energy began to leak from the Marut's optical sensors, a coruscating discharge of prismatic light, crackling with power, smelling faintly of static electricity. The Marut staggered, its movements becoming momentarily erratic, its eternal hum faltering like a skipping gear. Pyronius, prepared for this, quickly deployed a specialized vial he had crafted, a containment unit lined with alchemically treated crystal. He carefully positioned it to intercept the planar energy discharge. The vial glowed intensely as the raw energy flowed into it, the eternal clockwork mechanism whirring to stabilize the volatile essence. The discharge was brief but potent. As abruptly as it began, it ceased. Pyronius did not want to wait around long enough to catch the gaze of the Marut once more, but luck would not be on his side this day. The Inevitable stood motionless once more, quickly recovering as the grinding sounds began to fade. A faint shimmer of residual energy clung to its form, and a subtle flicker remained in its optical sensors. It had weathered the paradox, but not unscathed. Its gaze fell upon Pyronius, yet had what could only be described as a mechanical form of confusion. Pyronius took advantage of the delay, carefully sealing the vial, feeling the thrum of contained planar energy against his fingertips. He had his prize. But as he turned to leave, the Marut spoke in a booming, authoritative, and monotone voice.
Anomaly detected. Logical violation. Source identified. Organic entity. Baldur's Gate. Designation Pyronius. Analyzing.
It wasn't a threat, at least not yet. It was a statement of fact, an identification and cataloging of a deviation from order. But within that cold, mechanical pronouncement, Pyronius felt the undercurrent, a certainty of inevitable consequence. He had taken something fundamental from Unit 426, a piece of Mechanus itself imbued with the essence of logical disruption. And inevitables by their very nature do not tolerate such violations. He had created a debt, a cosmic imbalance, and he knew there would be a cost. Back in his workshop, the potion of transformation began to take form, a swirling vortex of dark energies. Pyronius added the vial of planar energy imbued with the essence of rare imperfection from Mechanus and watched as the mixture coalesced into an elixir of iridescent and darkly muted colors. Then came an interruption of pure chaos.
Pyronius, you old coghead! What the nine hell are you brewing in there? Smells like burnt ozone and the heat death of a cosmos. It smelled all the way from the alley.
Phalar Zizix, a gnome illusionist and occasional colleague, stood grinning in the doorway, his eyes swirling with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Lichdom, Pyronius replied, his voice flat. Why hide it? This was happening, he thought to himself. Clockwork Lichdom, to be precise. Phalar blinked, his smile now fading to take on a more serious tone not often seen by the gnome.
Oh, Lichdom, eh? Clockwork Lichdom. Sounds complicated and dangerous. Mechanically speaking, of course. All those gears, all those springs. You know, Interrputed. Things wear down, things break. Even clockwork things infused with dark evil magic.
Pyronius attempted to explain his pursuit of optimization, his transcendence of organic frailty, but Phalar just shook his head, his expression now surprisingly serious.
But chaos? Pyronius. Primordial chaos? That's not orderly. That's not you. That's not efficient. That's just messy. And on a cosmic scale messy. Machines made order, Pyronius, precision, calibration. Chaos is, well, chaos. Makes things go wrong. Always.
His words, grounded in practical, mechanical concerns, should have resonated with Pyronius and would have in years past. But the artificer, now blinded by his own obsession, dismissed them as nothing but short-sighted. His reply was cold. Your concerns are noted, Phalar, and dismissed. He hurried the gnome out despite objections, slamming the workshop door in Phalar's face. Sentimentality, emotion, both irrational distractions from his pursuit. It would not be long now. He was ready to transcend, ready to become Pyronius Mechanicus. Meanwhile, Justiciar Unit 426 was investigating. Its initial encounter with Pyronius's device had triggered a system error, an anomaly in its otherwise flawlessly ordered matrix. The Inevitable had also finished its analysis. Pyronius had violated the laws of natural order and must answer for his crimes. Unit 426 traced the anomaly back to Baldur's Gate. Its logic circuits, designed for adherence to law, were now focused on a single illogical variable. Pyronius had not been made accountable for his chaotic preparations to cheat death. As Pyronius neared the completion of his potion and the accompanying rituals of lichdom, Unit 426 was, in its own inevitable way, closing in. The potion, a swirling concoction of crimson, violet, and black, looked like something dredged up from the bottom of a particularly unpleasant well. Pyronius, having now reached the point where logic had long since abandoned him, raised the vial. It wasn't courage or even a desperate hope that drove him, as much as an almost chaotic curiosity, the same chaos that made him dissect a broken clockwork bird just to see how the damn thing worked, he mused, and so he drank. The transformation wasn't the dramatic bolt of lightning affair he had expected. It was more of a slow, methodical, yet agonizing disassembly of his own form. His flesh didn't wither as much as surrender, giving up like a poorly maintained machine, finally succumbing to the invasion of rust, revealing his new clockwork frame. Wires, finer than spun gold, traced the phantom pathways of his now vanished nerves. Gears, polished to a mirrored gleam, clicked into place, meshing with bone, not with the smooth precision he had strived for, but with a gritty, almost resentful sound. He could feel the cold metal against what remained of the organic, constantly reminding him of what he was losing or gaining. In truth, it was hard to tell. The inefficient pump that was his heart, now replaced by a clockwork engine powered by a slow-burning alchemical core and ticking with metronomic precision. Efficient, yes, but also strangely impersonal, even by Pyronius's mortal standards. His eyes became lenses of crystal set in brass sockets, offering a clarity that was almost too sharp, too clinical. His first vision was that of those antagonistic dust motes dancing in the air along with the minute imperfections in his own workshop lair. He felt different, certainly, but better? Honestly, he was not sure, just different. He instantly knew he was no longer subject to the vagaries of the flesh, the messy emotions, the inconvenient need for sleep, food, and air. But he also felt detached, like a clock wound too tight, ticking away without any real purpose. He arose, no longer the frail human craftsman. He was now a collection of gears and springs, a clockwork being, some might say a monstrosity. He was Pyronius Mechanus, the Clockwork Lich and Ganador's new agent of chaos upon the Sword Coast. In only the first days and weeks of an eternity of time that lie ahead for Pyronius Mechanus, the Lich had already secretly moved his workshop to become his new lair deep under the streets of Baldur's Gate, with most Baldurians thinking the old man artificer had finally kicked the bucket. He took a moment to adjust the paradox gear, his phylactery, nestled within a reinforced compartment in his chest. It was a clumsy, ill-conceived solution, he would admit, but it would have to do, temporary as it was. He'd deal with the details of its safeguard later. He was complete, transcended. A smug sense of confidence filled the Lich just as the entrance to his lair workshop exploded inward, the heavy wood and iron splintering and scattering metal across the chamber floor. Framed in the shattered doorway stood the 12-foot-tall Justiciar Unit 426, still monolithic, still resolute, its metal and stone form casting a long shadow over the Lich. The Marut's optical sensors locked on to the clockwork undead.
Pyronius of Baldur's Gate.
Its voice mechanical and monotone.
Lichdom confirmed. Unnatural transformation complete. Violation of natural order absolute.
Pyronius sighed. It was always something, wasn't it? The Marut took a step forward, the ground thrumming under its weight.
Directive unambiguous. You are designated for termination. Phylactery for seizure. Judgement by Primus. Hall of Concordance. Sigil.
A pause, a microsecond of calculated inflection.
Dead or alive, you're coming with me. To Sigil.
The Clockwork Lich tilted his head, a dry, clicking chuckle escaping his vocalizer.
Judgment? From a construct? You're a tool, Inevitable, a blunt instrument of outdated laws. Behold.
He gestured to his metallic form.
I am perfection, logic made manifest. I am beyond flesh, beyond spirit, and far beyond your jurisdiction.
But even as the words of defiance echoed in the workshop, a cold analytical engine within the Lich's new mechanical mind was already dissecting the coming confrontation. The Marut was a powerful construct with substantial strength, armor, and probable magic resistance. Pyronius knew his necromantic spells would be ineffective, as would his power word kill and stun. Of all the creatures sent to annoy him, why the inevitable? A flicker of concern filled the Lich's crystallized eyes, quickly suppressed by a logical recalibration. Ranged combat would be optimal. Distance would be paramount, yet in the confines of his lair, less than ideal. Then a spark of cold, mechanical confidence ignited. You see, the Lich was not without some special abilities, especially within his lair. In particular, the Clockwork Lich possessed the power of an alchemical ray of rust that would induce localized corrosion of metal that would be most effective against the Marut and offered the potential of mobility impairment. Additionally, the lair itself would provide a temporal distortion field that would alter the construct's attack vectors. This would have a limited deployment and had yet to be tested, so the Lich's new superior tactical application would be essential. He raised one of his clockwork arms, a focusing lens extending from the Lich's wrist. The Lich mused as he unleashed a ray of black and yellow energy that was the rust ray. The beam struck the Marut's metallic leg. A hiss of corrosive energy and a faint acrid scent filled the air. Patches of rust bloomed instantaneously on the polished surface, spreading across the construct's leg like a metallic plague. The Marut staggered as he advanced on the Lich, a noticeable hitch in his otherwise perfect movements. The Lich pressed his advantage, launching a volley of glowing shards, an empowered form of magic missile the Lich called a crystal shard barrage. The piercing projectiles ripped through the air, impacting the Marut's torso. Pitting appeared on brass plating and onyx fragments exploded outwards. But the Marut's advance continued, the massive bulwark absorbing the Lich's ranged assault. Despite the Lich's well-timed strikes, the Marut, with its heavy stone and metal limbs, closed the distance with surprising speed. The Lich knew he couldn't allow it to engage in close. As the Inevitable's arm swung in a wide arc, a blur of metal and stone aimed directly at his head, the Lich activated his lair's evasion field. Time seemed to distort and warp ever so briefly around him. The Marut's fist, a split second away from a crushing blow, seemed to slow, its trajectory altered, its unerring precision momentarily faltering. The Inevitable's blow, instead of connecting flush, only glanced Lich's metallic skull for minimal damage. He had bought himself precious fractions of a second, a fleeting window of opportunity. But the effort strained his systems. The evasion field flickered out, temporal energies dissipating. Limited use indeed, thought the Clockwork Lich. He knew he couldn't rely on it repeatedly, but he did not expect it to fade out so. His thought process was interrupted by the Inevitable's second attack, landing squarely on the Lich's chest in a devastating blow. The Lich's clockwork frame buckled violently. Steel plates shrieked, springs popped, and gears jammed. The Lich was hurled backwards, crashing against the lair's stone wall, sending tools and components flying. Pyronius quickly cast a disintegration spell, watching the thin green ray from the Lich's accusing finger impact the Marut for significant damage. Still, it was becoming clear that the Lich was overmatched. He tried to cast a plane shift spell, but not before the Marut unleashed the full power of its blazing edict. With a gesture, the Marut unleashed a wave of pure planar energy, erupting from its chest in a blinding wave of radiant heat and light, striking the Lich before then engulfing him in a cube of prismatic energy infused with the very essence of Mechanus. Agony, cold and mechanical, ripped through Pyronius's form. Not the searing pain of burning flesh, but the agonizing overload of circuits, the screech of overstressed metal, and the tearing of magical wards. His crystal lenses flared with blinding light, then dimmed, vision blurring, systems faltering. He felt the stun, a wave of pure, lawful energy disrupting his logical processes. scrambling his carefully ordered thoughts. For a precious, terrifying moment, his mind, his optimized engine of reason, stuttered and stalled. The Inevitable paused, standing over the reeling Clockwork Lich, its voice resonating with cold, mechanical authority.
Pyronius of Baldur's Gate, your violations are catalogued, your unnatural existence condemned.
With those words and a final decisive blur of motion, the Inevitable construct brought its powerful arms crashing down upon the head of Pyronius Mechanicus. Crystal lenses shattered, steel framework crumpled, and the intricate clockwork mechanisms within the Lich's skull imploded in a final shower of sparks and broken gears, ending the unnatural existence of Pyronius, the Clockwork Lich, for now. Silence descended, broken only by the faint hum of the Marut's internal systems. The Inevitable knelt, its movements precise even in the aftermath of battle. It reached into the ruined chassis of the Clockwork Lich, its metallic fingers unerringly finding and extracting the Lich's phylactery, the paradox gear. Examining the phylactery, the Inevitable turned, its mission complete, its purpose fulfilled.
Phylactery secured. Pyronius of Baldur's Gate terminated. Phylactery judgment will be rendered.
Justiciar Unit 426 then departed the workshop lair, leaving behind only wreckage and silence, carrying the chaotic phylactery of the Clockwork Lich. Justiciar Unit 426 traversed the plains, the paradox gear phylactery now secured. Sigil, the cage, the city of doors was its destination, and time was of the essence. The Hall of Concordance, a structure that defied Euclidean sanity yet resonated with a hyper-rational order, awaited. Within, the air thrummed with the silent pronouncements of cosmic law. Primus, the One and the Prime, a being of pure, multifaceted intellect and ruler of Mechanus, presided over the hall and registered the Inevitable's arrival. No words were exchanged or needed. Words were inefficient when pure data transfer sufficed. Well aware of the inherent properties of a Lich's phylactery, Unit 426 wasted no time in presenting the paradox gear, the chaotic soul vessel of Pyronius, now encased in burnished metal and crystal. Primus processed. Eons of computational power focused on the chaotic residue clinging to the Lich's soul vessel. Primus detecting what Unit 426 could not, the faint, corrupting whisper of the Elder Eye Gonador. Judgment was swift, devoid of sentiment, purely algorithmic. The paradox gear was not without threat, but the calculated judgment of Primus was that it was not to be destroyed. The phylactery and the Gonador-tinged soul of Pyronius it contained were a deviation to be corrected and recycled. Mechanus wasted nothing, not even chaos, flaws, paradoxes, anomalies. These were not errors to be purged, but raw materials, inefficient and misaligned powers awaiting to be transformed and reintegrated into the grand, eternal machine of order. And so the paradox gear, the essence of Pyronius Mechanicus' stolen immortality, was dismantled, not with malice, but with cold, clinical efficiency. The taint of the Elder Eye was siphoned, measured, categorized, its chaotic energies isolated and quantified. The remnant essence of the soul of Pyronius was reduced to raw data to be integrated into the vast, incomprehensible machinery of Mechanus, not as a master, not as an individual, not even as a consciousness, but as a single, minuscule component. No trace of the artificer remained, no flicker of the Lich's memory, no echo of his ambition. Only function remained, pure, unadulterated function. He was but an involuntary cog within the gears of Mechanus, a single grain of sand in an endless desert of gears. Pyronius Mechanicus had sought to escape the messy decay of flesh and achieve the ordered perfection of Mechanus. Yet ultimately, he had succeeded in a manner so ironically literal it bordered on cosmic jest, becoming the very dust he had so desperately fought against. Karma, it seems, is not without a sense of gallows humor. A calculated and undeniably logical fate, an irony that, perhaps, Pyronius would have appreciated. After writing this story, I'm convinced that if the YouTube algorithm were a plane, it'd be Mechanus, always watching, calculating, judging, and infinitely incomprehensible. So don't be a cog in the machine, stand out by liking, subscribing, and enabling notifications. I mean, it's just logical. And if you join my Patreon, you can explore a workshop Pyronius only wished he had, filled with meticulously detailed art and world-building resources, none of which will turn you into a lich. Probably. A sincere thank you to my Patreon and channel supporters that make this video possible. And thank you for listening. Until our next journey of discovery, take care, my friends.